My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion? Or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 14: The False Flag Deception. While previous chapters have focused on the individuals and institutions which make up the pyramid of power, this chapter will focus on one of the tools wielded by the pyramid. We are going to dive into the debate surrounding so-called false flag attacks. A false flag operation is designed to create the appearance that an attack or an episode of violence is caused by a person or nation while concealing the true perpetrator. The reference to flags stems from pirates flying a fake flag pretending to be an ally of their intended target so they could get within attacking distance. It has also been used in naval and land warfare, with soldiers flying fake flags or wearing the military uniforms of their enemies while they frame them for the attacks. Author G. Edward Griffin has been investigating the pyramid of power since the 1960s. He believes false flags are an essential part of how those at the top manipulate the masses.
This was really a common tactic in history. It's a common tactic. It goes all the way back to Roman times. And certainly now with control over the means of communication, it makes false flag attacks easy because the communications are the sources of how people perceive who did it and how it happened. You can create it completely out of nothing if necessary, or you can pick and choose little pieces of truth and puzzle them together in a different way that they look like something different. It's relatively easy to convince the unsuspecting audience that something happened that really was false.
As Mr. Griffin notes, false flags are often a method of achieving a reaction in the public, usually fear. If one group wants to turn the public against their enemies, they might stage an attack dressed up as their enemies to damage their reputation and the eyes of the public. As we have outlined in previous chapters, the corporate media can be used to shape a narrative or pump fear, and big tech can be used to censor contradictory opinions on social media. Together, big tech, the ruling class media, and the string pullers behind governments can create reality out of a manufactured or staged event. Claims of false flag events are not exclusive to any one nation. The 1933 burning of the Reichstag building came just weeks after Adolf Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and is believed by many to be a false flag operation organized by the Nazis to accelerate Hitler's rise to total domination. In post-World War II Europe, Operation Gladio was the codename for so-called stay-behind operations where the Western military-industrial complex, in the form of NATO and the CIA, worked with several European intelligence agencies to foment disorder and even stage false flag attacks. Daniel Ganser, Swiss author of NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe, claims stay-behind movements associated with Gladio were linked to right-wing terrorism and responsible for terrorist attacks against Italy's civilian population. In the United States, we have declassified documents relating to Operation Northwoods, which were prepared by the Department of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff for President John F. Kennedy in 1962. The documents, titled Justification for U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba, propose numerous plans for staging a false flag attack and blaming it on Cuba to justify a military attack on that nation. Some of the proposed plans included remotely controlling a civilian plane after it had been painted to look like a U.S. Air Force plane, a faked attack of a U.S. Air Force fighter off the coast of Cuba, the possible assassination of Cuban immigrants, and sinking boats of Cuban refugees on the high seas. Other documents prepared by the DoD which contain proposals for false flag attacks include Operation Bingo, Operation Dirty Trick, and Operation Mongoose. There is also evidence that the attacks on the U.S. military base in Pearl Harbor in Hawaii were a successful false flag attack. However, in this example, rather than the U.S. government staging an attack and blaming it on an enemy, the U.S. government is accused of knowing of the attack and allowing it to happen so they could take advantage of the ensuing fear experienced by Americans.
I would welcome a chance to go to court and introduce evidence to prove that Pearl Harbor was a false flag. Because by this time in history, the evidence is out in the open. A lot of it was suppressed and hidden. A lot of it was destroyed. But enough of it exists that I think it would be really easy in a court of law if I were allowed to present the evidence, if the court weren't biased or corrupt and refused to let me present evidence. If I were free to present the evidence, I'm sure I could convince anyone that Pearl Harbor was a false flag attack against the United States. It was a real attack, but it was set up so in such a way that the Japanese were enticed into it. And we won't get into the details, but the leaders in the United States knew full well that the Japanese Navy was coming. They wanted them to come. They wanted to be attacked. And they wanted that excuse to be able to jump into World War II so that they could sit at the peace table and help and recarve up the world afterwards. So, no, I'm not sure I could do that in terms of 9/11, but I think I could. I think by now the evidence is equally clear. And with the passage of every year, and when the time comes when Mr. Bush is gone, and all the key players are gone, then I think there will be less resistance to looking at the idea that, yep, even 9/11, as horrible as that was indeed a false flag attack.
One of the most well-known modern examples of a claimed false flag is the attacks of September 11th, 2001. The attacks of 9/11 are one of the most heavily debated geopolitical events in the last few decades. The mainstream narrative surrounding 9/11 claims that Osama bin Laden operated a covert network of Muslim terrorists from a cave in the Middle East and was able to penetrate some of the most highly protected airspace in the world. This account says the Twin Towers in New York City collapsed because of the planes and the resulting fires. However, this official version of events has been debated endlessly in books, essays, conferences, and documentaries seeking to uncover the truth about that fateful day. This collective movement of authors, researchers, engineers, architects, scholars, firefighters, and activists has become known as the 9/11 Truth Movement. Skeptical of the official narrative on 9/11, they've organized groups to challenge it, including architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, firefighters for 9/11 Truth, pilots for 9/11 Truth, the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and other local activist groups and individuals from around the world. It's a loose-knit movement without an official position, and the opinions, theories, and ideas held among its members sometimes conflict with one another. However, those working within the broader movement are bound by the belief that the official narrative promoted by the US government is full of holes. Much of the 9/11 Truth Movement focus on the evidence for a likely controlled demolition being responsible for the collapse of the Twin Towers, as well as World Trade Center 7, World Trade Center 6, and other buildings which received little to no attention. Many witnesses reported hearing or seeing explosions coming from within or underneath the buildings before their collapse. As far as being a false flag, there are a number of competing theories as to who the real perpetrators are if the attacks were not the actions of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Some researchers point to the funding and influence from the Saudi kingdom, and others point to Pakistani involvement. The most prominent theories center around members of the United States and/or Israeli governments being involved in the planning, funding, and execution of the various elements of the 9/11 attacks. The theories around 9/11 have been explored in numerous quality documentaries, from the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, James Corbett of the Corbett Report, my own mini-documentary, Declassify the Truth, and many other qualified investigators. For this chapter, we are going to take a look at two lesser-known but equally important false flag events. The 1995 Oklahoma City bombings. On April 19, 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City exploded at 9:02 a.m. and killed 168 people, including children, while destroying more than one-third of the building. The official story says that Timothy McVeigh, a military veteran, an alleged white supremacist, and a few accomplices set off a fertilizer bomb in a Ryder rental truck parked outside the building. While it's absolutely true that Timothy McVeigh was spotted at the federal building and had involvement in the planning of this attack, questions surrounding his true motives and other potential accomplices have led to many Oklahoma citizens challenging the official narrative. In fact, Charles Key, a former Republican member of the Oklahoma House of Representatives from 1986 to 1999, and again from 2006 to 2012, worked with Glenn Wilburn, whose grandsons were killed in the blast, to convene a grand jury in June 1997 to investigate claims of foreknowledge by the U.S. government and potential additional suspects. After 18 months and talking to more than 170 witnesses, the grand jury concluded, quote, "We cannot affirmatively state that absolutely no one else was involved in the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building." However, they added, quote, "We have not been presented with or uncovered information sufficient to indict any additional conspirators." The grand jury made an even stronger statement regarding claims of foreknowledge by the government, stating, quote, "We can state with assurance that we do not believe that the federal government had prior knowledge that this horrible terrorist attack was going to happen." The grand jury's statement did not stop Charles Key and other determined citizens of Oklahoma City. He was also involved in the formation of the Oklahoma City Bombing Investigation Committee, which brought the remaining questions to the attention of the local media and Oklahomans. The committee eventually released a final report in 2001, which made the case for McVeigh not having worked alone and for the FBI being aware of the attack prior to it happening. The 500-page report has testimony from individuals who argue that not only was Timothy McVeigh not acting alone, but the fertilizer bomb in the Ryder truck could not have caused the destruction on its own. In fact, retired Air Force Brigadier General Benton Parton reviewed the case and said that McVeigh's bomb alone could not have caused that much damage. Quote, "There is strong evidence that demolition charges were in the building," Parton wrote in a letter to a prosecutor in 1997. The best documentation of the many inconsistencies in the OKC bombing and the citizens' fight for truth comes from the documentary A Noble Lie. The documentary tells the stories of ATF agents being warned in advance.
Was the ATF office empty that morning?
I asked him if I could speak with an ATF officer that worked in the building so I could find out if they knew anything about my wife. And he told me that they were in debriefing. And I asked him, you know, I need to talk to one of them, I need to find out something. And he said that none of them had been in the building, so they weren't hurt. They'd been tipped by their pagers that morning not to come into work.
Exercises involving the bomb squad being in the area, other sightings of unknown suspects.
I had told you about the Ryder truck I had seen there before this.
Investigators doubting the official story.
Started doubting the official story that was coming out. You have to understand that the state, the local media were doing a good job the first day. Local law enforcement maybe also, I believe, was doing a good job. But once the feds came in, things started changing.
And how the story began shifting within days.
Who's going to investigate the investigators? Who's going to investigate the prosecutors? Who's going to hold them accountable? Who's going to hold us public officials accountable? And that's all we're trying to do here, in addition to trying to find the truth.
Well, initially that morning, all the media that was downtown there were reporting the truth. They reported the truth about the unexploded bombs, undetonated bombs being removed from the building. By afternoon, things began to ease a little bit. You could sense a difference, and by the next day, everybody but Channel 4 had changed their story completely.
A Noble Lie also tells the story of Hoppy Heidelberg, a member of the grand jury who says the jury was stifled in a number of ways and not given full access to information they needed.
See, we were never allowed to see the photo evidence from the cameras on the Murrah building that would have shown the truck being parked and the people who got out of the truck. That's all on tape. And we were authorized to see all of that, but we weren't allowed to see it. And in fact, nobody's been allowed to see it. All those tapes have been kept under wraps for 15 years.
One of the most troubling aspects of the OKC bombing investigation involved Officer Terrence Yakey, who began privately investigating the bombings after growing suspicious of the official investigation. Terrence Yakey, better known as Terry, rescued victims after the explosions and was awarded the Medal of Valor for his work. However, Terry did not want the medal because he grew to suspect he was being lied to about the true causes of the explosion. Yakey was collecting evidence when he turned up dead from an apparent suicide, which immediately drew suspicion from family and fellow officers. His body was found parked in his car off a country road with his wrist slit, his neck slit, and a gunshot wound to the head. The story of Terry Yakey has even grown to the point that mainstream outlets like CNN were forced to report on his story in March 2023, asking, "Why did this cop turn up dead?" Yakey's sister, LaShawn Hargrove, told CNN he had questions about how the explosion took place and the blast pattern. She said he asked, quote, "You know how they said the truck blew in? He saw evidence of blowing out." If true, this would be evidence of bombs within the building blowing outwards. Yakey's ex-wife, Tonya, has also stated that she drove him back to the federal building at night because he wanted to see the site when there would be less people around. She told CNN they headed to the building around 9:30 or 10, and Terry wanted to get a picture underneath where the daycare had been. She says the two were stopped by some government officials, either ATF or FBI, who refused to let him through. Tonya has also claimed that Terry wrote a detailed police report for the OKC Police Department. One day, Yakey showed up at their house upset because he said his police report had disappeared. He claimed his bosses were telling him to write a new one-page report. She also said she remembered getting an angry call from one of Yakey's supervisors asking him where he was and demanding that he turn in his report or be reprimanded. The OKC PD has declined to answer questions relating to Terry Yakey's report or its alleged disappearance. A Noble Lie also shares testimony from Yakey's family showing that no autopsy was done after his death. Needless to say, questions surrounding the OKC bombing continue to this day. Many who believe the event was a false flag attack suspect that Timothy McVeigh was either a complete patsy or unaware of the bigger operation taking place around him. The bombing was promoted by the US government and the corporate media as yet another sign that domestic extremism and domestic terrorism were on the rise in the United States, a rallying cry which continues in the political climate of the 2020s. It's also important to understand that the bombing of OKC led to the passage of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996, which was introduced by then-Senator Joe Biden. The bill was criticized for taking steps to remove habeas corpus protections. Biden, currently President of the United States, has often claimed that his bill was the precursor of the Patriot Act.
Just to set the record straight, almost the same thing that got passed, the Patriot Act, was introduced by me in 1994, and it was the right wing that defeated it. You guys tried to help get it passed, including the wiretap changes and the rest.
Which was also criticized for attacking civil liberties in the post-9/11 era. This is one reason why it's important to understand the false flag deception. These attacks build on top of each other, creating more and more panic in the minds and hearts of the public, which allows the pyramid of power to advance their agenda of control and domination. The 2018 Syria gas attack claims. The Syrian civil war has been raging since 2012. The conflict has numerous factions and rivalries, and other various militias. Throughout the decade-long conflict, there have been a number of claimed chemical attacks which have resulted in the deaths of an uncertain number of Syrian people. The deadliest claimed attacks were the August 2013 sarin attack in Ghouta, which killed hundreds and injured thousands. The April 2017 sarin attack in Khan Shaykhun, which is alleged to have killed 89 people, and the April 2018 claimed chemical attacks in Douma, which allegedly killed 43 people and injured 500 more. The official version of events says that Syrian President Bashar al-Assad was responsible for these attacks. Assad denies involvement and claims that if the attacks happened, they were the result of rebel groups on the ground, not the Syrian Air Force dropping chemical weapons. We don't have the space in this report to fully examine each of these claims, so we're going to focus on the 2018 Douma chemical attacks. It's these claimed attacks where Americans and people around the world were shown images of women and children foaming at the mouth after allegedly being exposed to toxic chemicals. It was these images of dead children which led then-President Donald Trump to join with France and the United Kingdom to drop bombs on Syria on April 14, 2018. Without waiting for a proper investigation, President Trump ordered the United States military to drop more than 100 Tomahawk missiles on Damascus. On April 16th, 2 days after the alleged gas attacks, several journalists gained access to Douma and interviewed residents in the area. One of these journalists was Robert Fisk. 2-time winner of the British Press Awards Journalist of the Year prize, and 7-time winner of the British Press Awards Foreign Correspondent of the Year. Fisk is a longtime foreign correspondent who the New York Times referred to as, quote, probably the most famous foreign correspondent in Britain, and The Guardian called him, quote, one of the most famous journalists in the world. Writing for The Independent, Fisk described the situation in Duma. This is the story of a town called Duma, a ravaged, stinking place of smashed apartment blocks and of an underground clinic whose images of suffering allowed 3 of the Western world's most powerful nations to bomb Syria last week. There's even a friendly doctor in a green coat who, when I track him down in the very same clinic, cheerfully tells me that the gas videotape which horrified the world, despite all the doubters, is perfectly genuine. War stories, however, have a habit of growing darker, for the same 58-year-old senior Syrian doctor then adds something profoundly uncomfortable. The patients, he says, were overcome not by gas, but by oxygen starvation and the rubbish-filled tunnels and basements in which they lived, on a night of wind and heavy shelling that stirred up a dust storm. According to the doctor Fisk spoke with, Dr. Asim Rahabini, the international organization commonly known as the White Helmets had a role in carrying out the false or exaggerated scene depicting a chemical gas attack. I was with my family in the basement of my home, 300 meters from here on the night, but all the doctors know what happened. There was a lot of shelling by government forces, and aircraft were always over Duma at night, but on this night, there was wind and huge dust clouds began to come into the basements and cellars where people lived. People began to arrive here suffering from hypoxia, oxygen loss. Then someone at the door, a white helmet, shouted gas, and a panic began. People started throwing water over each other. Yes, the video was filmed here, it is genuine, but what you see are people suffering from hypoxia, not gas poisoning. At the same time that Fisk was interviewing the doctors and residents, Pearson Sharp of One America News stated he interviewed between 30 to 40 residents of Duma. As with Fisk, Sharp says he found no evidence of chemical attack, and the residents he spoke with seemed completely unaware of the apparent incident. There was also a report from the German news station ZDF, which claimed the attacks were staged. While speaking on ZDF, correspondent Uli Gack reportedly stated, quote, people told us in a very convincing manner that this whole story was staged. According to Gack's commentary, he also noted that, quote, the militants brought canisters containing chlorine to the area. Critics of these claims say that the witnesses may have been threatened or coached by Syrian or Russian government officials. In fact, some saw the presence of Russian military police as a sign that some witnesses may have been tampered with or instructed what to say to the incoming foreign press. However, discrepancies in the story of the Syrian gas attacks don't end there. In May 2019, the Working Group on Syria, Propaganda and Media published a document signed by a man named Ian Henderson, an expert inspector with the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the OPCW, as far back as 1998 and as recently as 2018. The report concludes, quote, the dimensions, characteristics, and appearance of the cylinders and surrounding scene of the incidents were inconsistent with what would have been expected in the case of either cylinder being delivered from an aircraft. Instead, they believed a manual placement of the cylinders in the locations investigators found them is, quote, the only plausible explanation for observations at the scene. In November 2019, WikiLeaks began releasing leaked documents from the OPCW, including publishing an internal email written by a member of the OPCW fact-finding mission to Syria. The documents make clear that the OPCW report, published in July 2018, which found Assad was responsible for the attacks, was shaped to conform with the public allegations made by the US, UK, and France. British Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens reported on the OPCW emails, noting that the doctrine of the OPCW fact-finders report, quote, appears to be the worst instance of sexing up in support of war since the invasion of Iraq and Tony Blair's doctored dossiers. The emails show an OPCW investigator contacting OPCW Chief of Cabinet Robert Fairweather and his deputy, Amer Chouquet, on June 22, 2018 to raise grave concern about the details that had been excluded from or changed in the soon-to-be-published redacted report on the agency's investigation into the alleged gas attacks. He wrote that the redacted report had strayed so far from the evidence collected that it, quote, no longer reflects the work of the team. The email highlights statements that misrepresent the evidence collected in the on-the-spot investigation, including the assertion that the team had found, quote, sufficient evidence at the time to determine that chlorine or another reactive chlorine-containing chemical was likely released from cylinders. Another claim in the official report, that high levels of chlorinate organic derivatives were detected at the site of the alleged attack, was also false. According to the investigator, these chemicals were found in trace amounts as low as 1 to 2 parts per billion. In December 2019, journalist Derrick Broze resigned from Newsweek after he said his attempts to publish newsworthy revelations about the leaked OPCW letter were refused for no valid reason. Quote, "I have collected evidence of how they suppressed the story, in addition to evidence from another case where info inconvenient to the US government was removed, though it was factually correct," Broze said. Quote, "I plan on publishing these details in full shortly. However, after asking my editors for comment, as is journalistic practice, I received an email reminding me of confidentiality clauses in my contract, i.e., I was threatened with legal action." I interviewed Broze shortly after his resignation, and he explained to me that he believed the story of the OPCW leaks was newsworthy, but his editor and publisher sought to prevent the story from being seen by the public. Thanks to the work of Derrick Broze and independent journalists, the story of the OPCW leaks and the lies surrounding the alleged chemical attacks have not been forgotten. Another outlet and journalist responsible for keeping this story alive is the Gray Zone and Aaron Maté. In September 2020, Maté spoke at the United Nations Security Council on the OPCW's ongoing Syria scandal. In his remarks, Aaron calls this, quote, "one of the most important and overlooked global stories in recent memory," and urges the United Nations and OPCW to let the OPCW investigators air their concerns and present the evidence that was suppressed. In March 2023, Maté once again spoke at the UN Security Council about the continuing cover-up of the OPCW leaks and the lies of the Syrian civil war. The Gray Zone has consistently been one of the few outlets covering the updates on the OPCW scandal over the years, including testimony by former OPCW investigator Ian Henderson in January 2020, and an interview with former OPCW chief Jose Bustani, where he defends the whistleblowers who challenged a cover-up of the Syria probe. The fact of the matter is that once again, governments and intelligence agencies and their friends in the corporate media lied to the public over and over in order to craft a false narrative and perception. What can we do when governments and intelligence agencies perpetrate such horrendous actions? How do we move forward knowing that these institutions believe it is acceptable to use human lives as pawns in their geopolitical games? Are there any solutions for such a harrowing attack on humanity? Solutions. The solution to raising awareness of false flag operations is simple. Question authority. Do it loudly and do it often. When we are shown these catalyzing events, such as the OKC bombing, 9/11, the Christmas tree bomber, the shoe bomber, the underwear bomber, the Syria gas attacks, the 7/7 London tube bombings, and yes, COVID-19, we must do our due diligence to interrogate the official narratives being spoon-fed to us. This doesn't mean we must or should believe every random theory that pops up after world-shifting events. We must also remember that the intelligence networks seek to confuse, delay, and disrupt our activities by having us chasing our tails and fighting about theories we might not be able to prove. Rather than getting sucked into a place of division and animosity for anyone who doesn't subscribe to your specific theory or worldview, we ought to seek to better understand each other. I've spent years down at Ground Zero in New York City passing out flyers, marching and chanting, and trying to get people to understand the lies we have been fed about that specific event. The times I felt most successful were the times when I had the opportunity to talk one-on-one with individuals and really hear their concerns, their resistance, and their fears, while explaining to them that I was not anti-American or anti-whatever, but I was in fact pro-truth. The only way we can stop these institutions from continuing the false flag trend is to call it out as soon as we see the lies. Call it out as soon as we see the telltale signs of a false flag, including multiple suspects being ignored to focus on one individual or group, drills or exercises taking place near the site of the attack on the same day or within weeks or months prior.
Just to get this right, you are actually working today on an exercise that envisioned virtually this scenario.
Almost precisely. I was up until 2 o'clock this morning because it's our job, my own company, Advisor Consultants. We specialize in helping people to get their crisis management response. How do you jump from slow time thinking to quick time doing? And we chose a scenario with their assistance which is based on a terrorist attack because they're very close to a property occupied by Jewish businessmen. They're in the city, and there are more American banks in the city than there are in the whole of New York. A logical thing to do. And I've still got the...
I was going to say, how extraordinary today must feel for you as it unfolds.
An immediate rush to pass new legislation to protect the vulnerable population from further attacks. And, of course, demonizing of anyone who dares challenge the official narrative. When you see these signs, remain skeptical. Don't buy into every theory that pops up on social media. Take your time to sit back, let the dust settle, and the facts begin to emerge. Don't forget to remember the victims who are killed or injured in these attacks. Do not allow their pain and suffering to be forgotten in either our debates about theories or the mainstream's false version of events. Together, we can challenge authority, we can question narratives, and we can uncover the truth as we finally put an end to the false flag deception. To learn more about the false flag attacks of Oklahoma City and the Syrian gas attacks, I encourage you to watch A Noble Lie and The Duma Hoax, Anatomy of a False Flag by James Corbett. Thank you for watching.